$50-$60 a month.
I think ours is like $79 a month.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlimited with a gig speed.
Yeah.
And we signed like a life, as long as we're with them, that's what we pay. Like we're locked in at $79.
So I did the same thing here, but is it with MEC? Is that who you guys have, or is it somebody else?
SurfNet.
Yeah. So MEC did all the rural stuff out here.
Okay.
And ours is 100. There was a lower package, but because of what I do for a living, and I was already paying $140 a month for Starlink.
Yeah.
So it's $100 a month for the 1 gig speed, but it's like, and it hits it like when I do a speed test, it hits 997 megabytes per second download. It's stupid, and it makes such a big difference.
Oh, it really does. And we can watch, I mean, every TV in the house can be going, no problem. Kids streaming.
Well, for me, it's like uploading stuff. Because like there'd be times where like Erica would be working on her computer and need to upload something so I could grab it on my computer. This would be an audio file, and it would take, even with the Starlink was better, it would take like 5 minutes. Prior to that, when we had the old DSL, it would take an hour when Mike was here.
Our download speeds are 692. Our upload speed is 655.
Yeah.
And that was at 220 this morning, last time it was checked.
Yeah, ours is right at that gig. But now it's like when I upload like these YouTube videos, which that used to take, with the old stuff, I'd have to do it overnight because it would take 8 hours to do it. And then with Starlink, it would take like maybe an hour tops, 40 minutes, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Now I can upload a 2-hour YouTube video and it takes like a minute and a half.
That's awesome.
It's just like, boop, pops it right up.
Yeah, I think we were paying like $150 or something for Comcast. And now we're paying like $79 for this.
Yeah, it's crazy. They ran
it's way faster.
Yeah, and it's crazy they ran it through. Like they did it out here because of that. There's some kind of law they passed where like basically it's like broadband for everyone. Like by whatever year, everyone has to have access to broadband. Yeah. And so we got the fiber out here because we had nothing out here. So we got the fiber. Like my dad, who lives over by the golf course, they didn't run it through there because there's old Comcast lines, so they technically already have broadband, so they didn't run it through there.
Dun, 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 dun.
So fast. What's up, everybody? We got some people coming in. Oh, Susan says she'll get interruptions with her fire. We've had none, because that was the problem. The Starlink was great; everything would work fine. But man, there was a lot of outages.
Yeah, we
had the first year we had it, we didn't. But then like there'd be all the time be watching something be out, and sometimes I just had to come reboot the router. Or reboot the Starlink, and then other times it'd be like it would just go out for an hour or something and stop when they were doing an update or something. I need to send Erica the message.
I'm fucking dragging ass.
Pre-game was about. Yeah, me too.
Pardon my language.
I have not recovered. Like I said, I napped for a little bit when I got back from the colonoscopy, and then I came out here and I worked all day. And then in the evening I did go to the gym, but I just walked a little bit just to move myself a little bit. Yeah, I'm still not recovered. Luckily today we only had 1 day of school before the break started.
Yeah.
And so I told them all that if they had all their work done yesterday while I was gone, that we could just have movie day and relax. And so then I watched both National Treasure movies throughout the day because
I've never seen either of those.
Oh my god, they're such great movies.
I know, I've been told that,
but I let him like in the first hour like pick what movie. I said, pick anything on Disney Plus, we can watch whatever you want. And somebody wanted to watch that, so we started watching National. Well, we get through 45 minutes of it and the bell rings, and then the next hour came in and I was like, you guys get to watch the second 45 minutes. I was like, I'm not going to watch the first half of this fucking 6 times a day. So like we go, I'm like, I'll tell you what happened. So we played it, and then that ended. Third hour came in. They watched the end of that one, and I'm like, we're going to start part 2. And I'm like, I don't care what you want. Because half of them, they're like, can we be on it? Because they're not allowed to have phones in school.
Yeah.
But they're like, well, if we're not doing anything, can we be on our phones today? I'm like, you can be on your phones, you can be on your computer, as long as you're quiet or watch the movie. You're just going to relax. So that was my day. I was just sitting watching National Treasure all day.
What a good day.
Still holds up. It's so good.
Do you have school tomorrow?
No.
Nice.
Does Bridgman?
Nope.
Let me text stuff to Erica.
I get turkey dinner #1 tomorrow.
JV's. Who's that with?
My mom's side of the family. It's at my sister's house down in South Bend. Oh man, Sagan and I went to the Notre Dame game last week.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. I'm not even a Notre Dame fan. We had a blast.
Did they all of a sudden get because like they lost their second game to a really shitty team?
Yeah, and now they're just rolling teams.
Yeah,
like ranked teams.
Yeah, and because I just saw something today that said that it looks like they are like they're good chance they make the playoffs.
Yeah, there is a good chance. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like I thought they were terrible. They got their asses kicked by an unranked team.
Yeah, they lost to like Northern Illinois, but they've been playing really good. We got my sister works at Notre Dame, which we've talked about before.
Yeah,
she got us tickets. Senior day, it was awesome. Chicago, the band Chicago played at halftime, completely like unannounced.
That's crazy.
Like the marching band came out at halftime,
and
I was like, "What the hell are they setting up down at the other end zone?" I was like, "Is that something for like the color guard?" The next thing I know, they're like, "And to play with the band today,
Peter
Chicago."
Cetera, the whole
whole
shit.
group, marching band played with them. It was awesome.
I've been to a Notre Dame game forever. We used to at my dad's house. Their neighbors. He used to be a professor at Notre Dame, so they had season tickets, and he would usually at least 2 or 3 times a year. They couldn't go, and they would just give us their tickets.
We had a good time
in a long time.
We got home and Sagan's like, "Dad, I think I'm a little bit of a Notre Dame fan." I'm like, I get it, buddy. That was a good time. That was his first like big.
Yeah,
that was his first football game besides like high school football. He's never been to
playing this weekend.
Well, they played Army. They played Army or Navy this weekend, but we went to last weekend when they played Virginia.
Oh, they played because Army was undefeated.
Yeah,
that's where they were playing.
Yeah, and they beat them,
and they beat Army. Yeah.
That was this weekend, but that was away game. This was their last home game. We played with senior night. Notre Dame doesn't play in a conference.
Yeah, they're not in a conference. They're independent. Didn't they join a conference for a little while?
Not they're in a conference for like several other sports, but not for football.
But still not for football.
Yeah.
No, they're independent. Yeah, that Northern Illinois team is one of those teams where they literally pay them
to come,
like a couple $1 million to come play so they can just beat up on them.
Yep.
And then they got beat. It was pretty sad. Pretty sad.
Oh yes.
Oh, we're gonna go ahead and start this thing because I would like to. You're tired. I'm tired.
Yep.
No JV. Are you ready to do your intro?
I could. Let's do this.
All
we
right.
don't have to clap or anything, do we?
No, we don't have to clap, but I am going to end the pregame here for our patrons. Thank you guys for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the pregame. If you're listening to this on Wednesday,
I'm so sorry for what we said.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Also, if you made it this far, my bad.
Yeah. Hopefully you got the day off. Tomorrow is Turkey Day here. Is it Turkey Day ever? No, certainly not.
No,
it's not Thanksgiving everywhere else. Why would it be Thanksgiving in Uganda? You know what I mean?
You started the Patreon with one of the most clever segues we've ever had, and you just ended it.
I maintain the best
segue we've ever had, and
yeah.
You may have ended that with one of the worst questions you've ever asked.
I just realized as I was saying it. Listen, if you're in the United States and it's Thanksgiving for you and you celebrate it, I hope you enjoy the day. Everybody have a good time. In the meantime, we're going to let you guys go, you pre-gamers, so we can get into the big show. Talk to you guys next week.
Oh, bye, guys. I thought I already said bye.
All right, so that's the end of the pregame. And then...
Ahoy, friends. Thank you for tuning into Truth and Justice. You are listening to the Friday follow-up for Season 15, Episode 21, Not Guilty. This week, we heard Bob go into the Truth and Justice courtroom in front of a hypothetical jury and walk through and deliver his closing arguments. This episode's brought up a lot of theories from listeners and a lot of questions. We are sans Janet today, but Bob and I are here to talk about it all. But before we get started, Bob, I'm just going to give you one quick applaud for this episode.
Thank you.
You did a really good job.
And by the way, if you're listening to this and there's just silence there, it's because Alphonic took out the clapping. But Zach did clap. There was a clap there that used to be there.
If you watched online, you saw it.
Yeah. Thank you. So what did you think? Your thoughts?
It was really, really good. It was really intriguing. I love the idea that you went back and set this up as if it's only the stuff that was presented in court, nothing that we know now.
Mm-hmm.
And you went forward and you put together a really appealing argument, I thought. Now, there are certain aspects that I don't know. As a layman, I don't know what can be said and what can't. There's a couple times where you're talking about some of the officers and you're talking about things. I think you said at some point, Sonia Lucas was lying through her teeth. Like, I don't know if all that's... Can they say that? Can they say something like that?
Closing arguments are pretty... I mean, if there's lawyers here that can correct me, they can do that. But closing arguments are kind of the Wild West. Like,
I thought they were kind of gloves off.
Yeah, so you're kind of instructed by the jury's instructed by the judge that closing arguments are not evidence. So if you object during that, generally the judge will just say, overruled. The jury, just remind you, this is not evidence. Because I mean, I've read closing arguments where lawyers have just literally just said stuff that's not true. Like as an example, in this case, didn't happen in this case, but I've seen examples like this where like the DNA that matched Andrew Wayne Bell, or at the time they just knew that the DNA was for someone else on the bullet casing, where they could say something like, we know because of DNA this bullet casing came from Jody Hill. Like they'll say shit like that. And then like somebody will, Carolyn Dwyer, who's an attorney, I believe, right, as an attorney, said that like only jerks object during closing arguments, because then somebody will like object, that's facts not in evidence, that's not what they said, and the judge will just say, remind the jury that it's not evidence. But it's very, it's pretty much frowned upon too. And we're going to get into some of that because some people had made some comments about some of the things that I said that they thought weren't exactly factually accurate or whatever. But I was trying to write it as though, to try to stay in between those goalposts.
Yeah.
And say things the way that they would be said in court.
No,
that
absolutely.
Expect a defense attorney to say in court.
I caught that part, because at one point in the closing arguments, you talking about the DNA, and you said whoever's DNA that is the killer, which we now believe is probably not true. But at the same point, at that point, we didn't know.
We believe that the DNA is not the killers.
That's on those
I think it's certainly connected.
Oh, I didn't say it's not connected, but I thought there was an alibi for.
No, Bell's never been investigated.
Okay.
To my knowledge, has never been investigated. And that's one of the biggest frustrating parts is once they realized that's who it was,
they just let it go.
Yeah, the state still is pushing back against it, trying to make excuses about it. And so like Andrew Wayne Bell has never been brought into an interrogation room and questioned about how his DNA got on the bullets that were used to kill Demario Lowe. That's never happened.
I totally missed. For some reason, I thought we had an alibi for him, but I guess I totally missed that then. We did not have an alibi. No. The one thing that I really appreciated, and I think is the most like prominent part of this, is the fact that you put together the timeline the way you did. That you showed piece by piece why the murder happened at 11:45.
Yeah,
over and over and over. I think that's the most compelling piece of evidence, or lack thereof, in this case.
Right. Well, and I think that it goes to. I've had a discussion with kind of a usual person I have these discussions with on the Facebook page about that, who just still. I was going to say pretends, but I don't want to assume anything. Maybe I'm sure they probably really believe this, but to me, it's shocking to me that someone can see all that and then say, this is ridiculous. This is nonsense for you to say that they changed the time. That's crazy. When it's like, I'm just telling you what the fucking evidence says.
Yeah.
That's the first detective called to the scene said he got called at midnight. How do you get around? I don't understand how people get around that. How do you get around that? And it's not like you could claim it was a typo if he didn't then 2 sentences later say at 12:30 I interviewed Victoria Miles.
Yeah.
Like it's tracking. The times are tracking along with it. And then I really didn't realize until I was doing the closing, when I was really kind of breaking down the timeline. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me, but that Victoria Miles is being interviewed. She's the first person interviewed. This shit just happened. And they're interviewing her. And she says he got there at 11. And it was about 45 minutes later when the shooting started. To McGinnis, she said 30. To McKinney, she said 45 minutes. Pretty short time. So like then we're supposed to believe this wasn't like a week later, a month later. Like she knew it happened at 11 is when he got there.
Yeah.
She says 30 to 45 minutes. Like you don't mistake that with almost 2 hours.
Yeah. No, you don't.
Yeah. It's like everything fits. So I'm glad you picked up you like the way that was lived, because to me, that was a big thing that I would have focused on at trial. But again, that goes back to I also never would have stipulated to that 1240 bullshit like White did during the trial.
Yeah, that's bonkers to me. But the idea that you put together this timeline, you really hammered on this timeline, and then you at the end you brought up the fact that you're like, and there's no evidence that ties Jody. There's no physical evidence that puts Jody at this scene.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. That actually was the thing that really made me want to do this when I was reading White's argument. Like he touches on it, he talks about the robbery, but I don't think he talks about it in the right way. But like what I really wanted to do was to step back and have the jury actually look. Like you have to look past all this other stuff, and you have to tell me what actual, and I proposed this to the people again. I've continued to try to get people to come on to discuss the guilty argument. Nobody will do it, but I'd like to like have a like not even a debate, just a conversation about it. Like, what evidence is there that Jody Hill committed this murder? Because that's it. That's like like the robber, whether Jody did or didn't do the robbery, whether you think that's a motive or it could be a motive. All that is some circumstantial evidence surrounding motive. But what actual evidence? Like, you have zero evidence that Jody had the gun. The only eyewitness of the crime says they were wearing this black coat. There's zero evidence that Jody owns that coat or has a coat like that or was seen that. And as a matter of fact, the prosecution presented evidence that Jody was wearing a different coat.
Mm-hmm.
You had the car thing. I thought was huge. I hadn't really thought about that until I circled back for this. That Victoria Miles said in both of her statements right after it happened, it was a small box-shaped car. Jody drove a big old boat Cadillac. It was not small or box shaped.
Yeah.
So like there's literally no evidence that Jody. So I think that if I was going to sum this down to a 5-minute closing, it would be like, look, this is what the prosecution has to prove to you. He has to prove to you that Jody Hill was there and that Jody Hill's the one that pulled the trigger. That's what he has to prove to you. There's no murder weapon. There's no evidence that Jody had access to the murder weapon. There's no evidence that Jody's car was there, other than this hearing this sound test 6 months later.
Mm-hmm.
The witnesses that saw the car, the only witness that saw the car said it was small and box shaped. So it was like really hammering down to what evidence is there. There isn't. So you can't convict somebody and send somebody to prison with no fucking evidence. And it's not one of the arguments that somebody was making on Facebook was like, well, the way you say describe reasonable doubt, that means no one could ever be convicted on circumstantial evidence. I'm not saying that at all. Certainly they can, but there isn't circumstantial evidence here.
Yeah.
There's conflicting evidence. When your only witness who saw the car says it was small and box shaped, that's not like allowing circumstantial evidence. The evidence says it wasn't Jody's car, and then when your only eyewitness to the shooter says the person was wearing a black coat with a gray stripe on it, and the prosecution presents Jody had this bright three-colored Michigan jacket.
Mm-hmm.
That's not circumstantial. That's directly conflicting.
There was a piece in there that I didn't think about, and you brought it up really well, is you talk about that coat and you talk about it being a big starter coat. And I remember those starter coats.
Yeah.
They're big and puffy.
I had one.
Yeah, I didn't have a Michigan, but
mine was Notre Dame.
I think I had a Charlotte Hornets one, but
of course you did.
Of course we did. But the idea that they're kind of big and puffy, and I never thought about that idea that if Jody's wearing this coat, it's hard to tell that person's tall and thin.
Right.
That you brought up in there.
They certainly wouldn't look thin.
No, they wouldn't.
Especially Victoria's final trial testimony is that this person runs in this big wide arc over by this other house that's over 100 feet away,
mm-hmm.
and the motion light comes on, and they get this fleeting glance of a silhouette in one of those. Like I said, if anybody that's had one of those coats knows, like, they're puffy.
Yeah,
they're big puffy coats. Like you wouldn't describe anybody as being very thin wearing that coat. And another thing that I don't know that I have talked about it. I certainly in my mind, it wasn't fresh in my mind until I was piecing all this stuff back together for the closing argument, was that DeJuan James, where he was at, we've looked at it on the map. He wasn't
mm-hmm.
directly across the street from the crime scene. He was to the north, a couple of houses. He was directly across the street from the house that Victoria says had the light on it.
Yeah.
And he said it was pitch black and he could only see the killer go around the side of the house and then run, remember, between the car and the house to the back. So just besides all the other reasons, how do you believe Victoria? Unless you think DeJuan James is lying for some reason.
Yeah.
Which his is accurate. Like, you can fact check his statement. He said it's black. Well, pitch black over there. Well, there's no light there. That makes sense.
Even according to the police, they had to pull up and use their headlights.
Right, because it was so dark over there.
Yeah.
So so like his statement actually checks out with the evidence that we have at hand. So like it wasn't like this weird argument of like, oh, well, you're saying circumstantial evidence doesn't work. Like, give me circumstantial evidence. But circumstantial evidence that someone might have been involved in a robbery and therefore might have had a motive.
Yeah.
And even the motive doesn't play out. I didn't get into it in the closing because I didn't want to muddy things up anymore. But like even the motive, like I did read that part of the statement from Andre Williams. Andre Williams, right?
Yeah.
sorry, I got so many names floating around in my head. I keep thinking that he's actually a Blackwell, but he goes by Williams. But where he said that when he talked to Mario said he wasn't going to testify against anybody in court. So where's your fucking motive?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
If he said that he was not going to testify, that means like if that conversation happened, according to the state's witness, if the conversation did happen, if for some reason Jody was there and had the conversation, you would have to imagine that Mario would say, I'm not planning on testifying against anybody.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about circumstantial evidence too is like you have to take in the totality of all the evidence, right?
Yeah.
But if every piece of evidence can be fact checked and torn apart, then there is no, I mean, the totality isn't there either.
Yeah. There's no totality of it. There's no preponderance of evidence. There's like any of these legal burdens that you could try to get past. Like you don't have that. You certainly don't have it beyond reasonable doubt, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And what kills me are the people that are still, and I was just having this argument with somebody, it's the same person that I've had it a million times with, that says they are 100% certain that Jody is guilty. And I just, like, to me, that is the most intellectually dishonest argument that you could, like, you can say you believe they're guilty. I'm not going to argue with it. If you look at that and you think they're fine. But like, I can start going through the list. I'm like, does it not give you any pause that someone else's fucking DNA is on the bullet casings, not a random person, but a person with a history of gun violence who lived 2 blocks away at the time? His DNA, 100%, his DNA was on those bullets. That doesn't make you think, well, maybe. Or the fact that, the car, the stuff we just talked about it with the car, the stuff that we, this whole list, where's the evidence that they had this gun? Where's the evidence of any of this stuff? And like went through this whole list and they're like, nope, none of that stuff matters. I'm 100% certain. None of that bothers me.
I hate the 100%. The 100%, regardless of how you feel.
To be fair, they didn't say the words 100%. What they said was they're certain.
Okay.
But still, that's 100%.
Because certain is different. But 100%, like you can't, unless you show me a video
right
of the person doing it, then there's no 100% for me. Even if I believe the person's guilty, there's no 100% for me.
I have a hard time believing, and maybe it's my own bias, but when I look at this case objectively, I have a hard time believing that anybody could look at this and not have some doubt.
Yeah, I agree.
That they got, I mean, you've got every witness and a time card saying they didn't leave work till midnight. You've got confirmation of the witnesses. They drove them home, stood there, talked for 20. It's already 12. Jody's time's accounted for till 12:30. They don't know where Mario is. Supposedly the 911 call happens at 12:40. So there's already not enough time, even with that. And then there's all this evidence that it actually happened before midnight. And then all the other stuff that we've been talking about. Like, I find it hard to believe that anybody looking at this case and actually being objective can say, nope, none of that stuff bothers me. I don't have any doubt whatsoever. Like, I'm sorry. I'm gonna stop there because what I wanted to say was give me a fucking break, but I'm not gonna say that because everybody's got their own. But I mean, it's an unreasonable position as far as I'm concerned. Like, if someone's telling me like, yeah, but I still think that, all right, think what you think, but like, this is the same person that said this is the most obviously guilty person that I've ever covered, which is a fucking ridiculous statement. I will say that.
Yeah,
that's fucking ridiculous.
That is pretty ridiculous. So we started to talk about this a little bit in the pregame, and I know we stopped ourselves, but we talked about length of closing, and you weren't 100% sure how long this was going to take, and I know you have some time constraints, so your closing was probably about an hour long.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know how long their closings were in this case? Or?
I don't. It's probably because the way Erica had the file broken down for me, like I had just the closing argument to look at when I went through them. So, but the full volumes are up on the website now. So I'm sure the judge's instructions for closing would be in there because they do always put a time constraint on it.
Okay.
I figured based on the amount of pages that I had read in the state's closing, that I figure it was probably about an hour.
Okay.
And so I tried to shoot for about an hour.
So for me, the most recent case, obviously in our spectrum right now, is Delphi. And I know that they gave them 2.5 hours for closing for each side. And I don't know what the rebuttal like how much time they had for the rebuttal, but I don't think it was a lot, but I just didn't know if that's normal or if that's a
I've seen all kinds of, I've seen cases where they gave them 45 minutes each. I've seen cases where they gave them like 6 hours each. I think a lot of it depends on the length of the trial and how complicated they think it is.
That's for me as a juror, just sitting back and as a juror, to listen to someone rattle for 6 hours. would be awful.
I think it would be a mistake to go that long.
Yeah, because I mean, as hard as you're trying to pay attention, like that's a long time.
They better be a real good speaker and be real organized.
Yeah.
But you think about a case like, say, the O.J. Simpson trial.
Mm-hmm.
This trial went on for months and months and months, and then the two attorneys have to like summarize that to a jury. Like, it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
But a lot of times what they do in those situations is they have co-counsel bounce back and forth. So like one of the prosecutors will talk for an hour, and then the other one will get up and talk for an hour, and then the other one will get, they'll bounce back and forth and do things like that. But it's still, that's a lot to listen to.
So long. Even 2.5 hours, thinking about that for Delphi, 2.5 hours is even a long time.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And I don't know if they use that much time.
I don't know how much time. I just know that was the time limit I think they had set aside for them, was 2.5 hours.
Yeah. And this one, like I said, I thought about being very brief, but what I was trying to do was play like I was there in the moment, knowing that Cotter is going to come up and rebut me. So there was a lot of things that I was front running. One thing that I meant to talk about, to front run, and I just didn't get around to it. When I thought about it, I was like, I'm not going to try to wedge this in somewhere. Was talking about the kites, because I knew that based on what I had said, I try to put myself in the position after he hears what I say, what's he gonna say?
Okay,
not just based on what he actually said in his rebuttal. And so I was going to hit on the kites and say, I basically, the point I was going to make was, yeah, Jody wrote all these letters trying to get the police to look at somebody else. As jurors, ask yourself, what would you do if you were innocent and you were in prison and they were trying to convict you for murder? You'd probably do anything you could.
Yeah.
And then I would swing it back to, but I'll remind you that no matter how much that makes him look bad, or makes them look bad, or how much you think that affects their credibility, it's still the prosecutor's job to provide evidence that Jody Hill was on that scene and pulled that trigger.
It's funny you brought that up. I recently talked to a prosecutor, not with this case, not anything to do with this case, but a prosecutor, and we were discussing that, and they said exactly that. We were talking about the kites, and like, well, of course, a guilty person is going to try to push people off in the right or in the wrong direction, and they said, but an innocent person is going to do that too.
Yeah, they're the same thing.
And the prosecutor was the one telling me this.
Yeah.
So, there's more there than what people want to give it to.
Yeah, well, and there's, and Janet's made that point several times. It's like, lying about the, because people are like, well, Jody lied about the robbery. Like, of course they lied about the robbery.
Yeah.
Do you think that they were like, it's not right, they shouldn't, but what would you do? It's like, if you admit to this robbery, they're going to convict you of this murder.
Yeah.
Nope, not happening.
Oh, what a mess. All right, you want to get in some of these questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. First one is from Lorraine. And they say, thought the closing was really good. Thought the closing was really good. She did already believe Jody was innocent, but it's a really important point that even if Jody was holy cow, let me start this all over again.
So you need to know, the way I put that in, it's not a quote. so I put in, those are like comments from listeners. So you'd say like whatever the name was.
All right. Well, I was reading it as a quote.
Not a quote.
All right. So this first comment's from Lorraine. She already believed that Jody was innocent, but thinks it's a really important point was that even if Jody had the very limited time to get to this crime scene, they would have no way of knowing where Mario was.
Yeah, and that's obviously I've been kind of saying that the whole season, but I hope what I was hoping to do with this closing is to get people down to to look past, to me, the kites are noise, right? Even the robbery is noise.
Yeah.
In all the different elements of this case that were kind of meant to kind of distract away from, or to try to go towards motive, to really look at the practicality of it. If Cornelius isn't leaving Jody until 12:30, as we said, there's really still not enough time, even with that. But even if there was, how in the world would Jody know to drive to 784 Broadway to find him?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, you would have to have some sort of communication, whether it's cell phone, which you feel like you could check a cell phone record.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's no, they didn't present any evidence that happened.
Because that's the only way, right? Someone would have to.
So the funny thing is, the argument that I've heard from people on the other side have said, well, Jody knew where Mario was because they were stalking him all night, according to Candace Smith. It's like, right, but they weren't.
Yeah,
she was lying. And we know that because Jody was at work, and he's got 3 witnesses to confirm that he was at work, that they were at work, along with now a time card to know that they were at work that corroborates everything those witnesses had said from the very beginning. So there's no way, even the prosecutor didn't claim that that was actually happening, because it conflicts with all the actual evidence.
So there was an hour or 2 hour time period early in the night where he was off because he had to go to a class, like a anchor management class or
before
something.
7 p.m.
Yeah. So even that, I mean, he's off.
Canvas Smith says this is happening between like 9 and 11.
Yeah, there's no way.
No.
All right. So listener Jennifer really appreciated the closing arguments. She thinks by hearing this that the jury definitely would have acquitted, or at the very least would have been a hung jury. But she also says that the prosecution would have had a go after this and would like to see someone make an attempt at rebutting Bob's closing.
Yeah. So I had somebody say that they were, this is what I got from it. Somebody was like, well, I really thought about doing a rebuttal. I think they were confused when I was asking people to come on the show, that I was asking somebody else to like write a closing argument. It's not what I was asking for.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody said they started to write a closing. They said they just, it's the same person that is just that is certain that Jody's guilty. They just said Cotter just did such a great job. There's nothing else to be said about it. So I haven't. If somebody wants to do that, they're welcome to. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I think they use it as an excuse to say that they think it's some kind of trap. If you listen back to other seasons when people actually have come on and had the conversation with the guilty, I'm not mean to anybody. I'm nice to everyone. It's just a conversation. It's not even a debate. It's not edited or anything like that.
Yeah.
To have, I really wish somebody would do it, but it seems to me, especially like in this case, obviously I've laid it out there. I'm looking at the chat. Everybody's that's here is like, yeah, this, like, I've seen like this case is nothing but reasonable doubt. Somebody says that there's literally zero evidence here. It's all smoke and mirrors. That seems to be, the feeling on it. So if somebody, that says they're so certain about it, to me, what they seem to do is, and we see this in a lot of seasons, what's easy to do is to sit back and take a day and pick a couple little things and write a nice long Facebook post that makes all your little arguments in there, and then post it without a back and forth, and post that, and then let it sit there. And then they decide, when people start asking questions and make responses, they either will engage if they think they've got something they can engage, whatever that point was, or they just ignore it. That is an easy thing to do. A difficult thing to do is to have a conversation in real time where somebody can push back on some of that.
Yeah.
And again, as I've always said, as you've heard when I've done it before, I'm not looking to attack anybody. I just want to have the conversation. I genuinely would like the audience to hear what someone who thinks Jody is guilty thinks. And I'm willing to put that perspective on the air. Or the crazy thing is, the same people that are like Bob's bias and Bob manipulates are the same people that won't come on here and share that argument.
Yeah. And you're not looking to debate. I know that. You're not looking to debate. And I know there's probably been one sentence, but the one that comes up is season 6, when you had Colleen Barnett on.
Yeah.
You let her speak the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
You let her get all her points.
The
prosecutor. You let her get all her points out. Why would you not?
Right.
That's,
and I think I even had a listener come on in that one later in the season, to kind of, and we just had a discussion about it, and we just, it was amicable.
I think it's great.
Yeah. So
I don't see why anybody wouldn't, especially if they feel that strongly about it. I don't see why they wouldn't.
Yeah. So that we'll move on, but that offer still stands. And I guess we'll move on to the next question or comment or whatever we have.
All right. This question is from Tony. So after talking to Sonia, do you think she told a story that didn't really make sense on purpose, maybe in defiance to tip off the jury that the story was fake?
No, I don't think so. I think that when I sat down and talked to her, I just said, listen, I just want to know the truth, no prompting, and I'll just tell me what went. And she told me a fluid story, a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end that made sense, and everything made perfect sense to me. That's what really happened. I think what you have in this case was what we know now is that the whole thing was a fairy tale, right? So it didn't happen. So she got sent up onto that stand to tell a story that's not true. And then, I think what just happened is, well, then she gets pressed, when what oftentimes happens when someone's lying, they got pressed on some details and she didn't know the answers to it. Like, did they try to say something first? Yeah. What they say? Well, I asked if he was, I think they even prompted, like, did you ask him if he was okay? And she's like, yeah. And what did he say? He's like, well, he tried to say yeah. Like, I don't think that there was anything premeditated on her part. I think she was like, uh-oh, I just thought I was going to come up here and say that he said JoJo. Like, now this is getting more complicated. I don't have the answers to these questions.
Anna asks, were the robbery charges dropped before or after the murder trial? And did the jury know that the charges were dropped?
I believe the charges were dropped. To the charges, don't quote me on this. I will check on this and circle back to it. But I believe the robbery charges were still pending. And then by the end of, like, after the murder conviction happened, then they dropped them and they never charged Jody with the robbery. I know that because I'm almost sure of that now. I'm 99% sure, because they needed that to still be hanging out there. They couldn't have like had Jody get tried for the robbery and get acquitted and then come in here and make all these points about the robbery. Nor I don't think that could they have dropped those charges and then still try to make all these points about the robbery.
So this question says, does Jody have any appeals left? Does Jody have any appeals left? Kathy wants to know how all this new information would play into an appeal if he does, or if they do.
Jody's in the spot where a lot of people are, where they've gone through the direct appeals, they've gone through some habeas. Unfortunately, Jody represented themselves in a couple of, filing a couple of writs along the way. So where Jody's at now is where we often find people. That is where they have to, in order to open this back up through the court, they will need to have new and convincing evidence to reopen it. So some of the stuff, I can't really get into anything, but there is some evidence that we've covered that I've found that hasn't come out on the podcast yet. That certainly qualifies as that could lead to that. But for what has come on the podcast, so for example, Sonia Lucas's recantation, that is new evidence.
Okay.
That is new evidence. She was a linchpin of the state's case. So that affidavit and her testimony that she's agreed to testify to, that would be enough they could file a writ based on that. And so anytime the appeals are done, is if you find new evidence, you can always go back to the drawing board and reopen things up again. But then also, as I've mentioned, that, as we learned from Detective McGinnis, and that I've confirmed by having conversations with them, the Attorney General's Office Conviction Integrity Unit is actively investigating this case right now. And
do we knew that? Did anybody know that? I mean, is that
yeah, I shared that.
Okay.
Yeah, that just that they're actively investigating. I don't have a statement from them about it other than that they are actively investigating the case. I did have a conversation with them just 2 days ago.
Good.
And just confirmed that the impression I got is that this is not a case that is just sitting on a pile somewhere.
That's good.
That is going to be worked on. That is being worked on right this very second. But also, so there's different routes here. So to understand this, the Conviction Integrity Unit in the Attorney General's Office of Michigan, they are not looking for loopholes in the trial, right? So they don't care if it was ineffective assistance to counsel. They don't care if it was a Brady violation. They work on actual innocence.
Okay.
So for that, so if there's action taken by the Attorney General's office in this case, or any case in the general terms, it will be because their investigation revealed that this person was actually innocent. So, say for example, in this case, let's say they have the time card now. They review the testimony. It was undisputed that Jody didn't leave work until midnight. If they found real solid, indisputable evidence that the murder happened at 11:45, that goes to actual innocence. Jody could not have done this. It doesn't matter whether it was ineffective assistance to counsel. It doesn't matter if it was a Brady violation. It wouldn't matter. It's if this person is innocent, then they're going to overturn the conviction based on actual innocence. So that's why there's really not, like, you haven't heard me ask for help with an attorney for Jody or anything right now, because like right now I don't know what they're doing. Like I'm not privy to that information.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a one-way communication from me sending stuff to them. They don't tell me what they're doing or what they're going to be doing. They can't share that stuff with me. But while that's happening in the Attorney General's office, then we don't need to start some other route going through a defense attorney and an appellate attorney right now. So there's a lot going on right now. I do I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding with that office, that if they decide like they're done, they don't think there's anything they're going to do, that they'll at least let me know that.
Okay.
So that we can move forward with it. because like right now I'm not even that's why we're kind of pausing where we're at right now, because at this point in this stage of the game, normally I'm now going out. I have a list of 5 different people that I desperately want to go talk to. I know where they're at. I know how to talk to them. I've got connections to talk to them. I'm not doing that because I don't know what the AG's office is doing. And I don't want to go screw something up that they're doing. So I'm trying to just stay back and let them do their thing right now. So
it's a good problem to have. It's not good for the podcast, but it's good for this case.
Yeah, I mean, if Jody, if you believe Jody's innocent, and if they agree, then it'd be great for us. Yeah, I mean, it's really good problem to have, that you have the state prosecutor's office, the attorney general's office is actively looking to see if they can, not to see if they can, but to see if Jody is actually innocent right now. And I think that's fantastic. But it just kind of, from a podcast production standpoint, it's like, okay, well, I'll just twiddle my thumbs then while I'm waiting for this to shake out. So I know that's a long, drawn out answer to what you're saying, but as far as where the appeals are at, I think that we could open Jody's appeals back up based solely, if nothing else, solely on Sonia Lucas's recantation.
That's good.
But there's more on top of that.
So Carolyn said that she guesses that the DNA on the bullet doesn't qualify for new evidence because it was there, right? They already knew the DNA, even though they didn't have who it was. They had the DNA.
Yeah, so those are the technicalities you deal with. Now, that doesn't mean the attorney general's office might not do something with that, but from a standard appeals process type thing. So because the jury was already made aware that the DNA on that bullet casing wasn't Jody's, they already knew that. It becomes a really big hurdle then to use that then to overturn the conviction, because the prosecutor will just argue that if the defense argues like, well, this goes to actual innocence because now we know that's Andrew Wayne Bell's DNA. The prosecution will say the jury already knew it wasn't Jody's DNA, and so this wouldn't have changed the outcome.
So it doesn't matter whose DNA is.
I maintain that knowing that it is a convicted, I believe, felon. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm pretty sure it was a convicted felon. Yeah, it was felony. A convicted felon with firearms charges from 3 blocks away from there. That is far more compelling than it's just someone's DNA. We don't know who it is. Because keep in mind how crazy that is. Like the people that are ignoring that, that DNA got put into a worldwide, at least a national database with millions and millions of people in it. And then it comes back to somebody who lived right fucking there, right fucking then.
Yeah.
On the bullets that shot DeMario Lowe's. And so for the people that are just like, that doesn't matter to me. Like, how does that not matter to you? I don't know. Speaking of which, I do want to point out, Chris had said something when I was talking earlier about somebody coming on to discuss the guilty side of the argument. She said, well, it would give her pause because I said that the people on the guilty side are not being intellectually honest. What I'm offering, Chris, is to come on and explain it to me and explain it to everyone. To me, it doesn't seem like an intellectually honest argument at all to say it doesn't give me one iota of pause that someone with a record of gun violence has their DNA on the bullet casings that shot DeMario Lowe's and lived a few blocks away. That doesn't bother somebody at all about this conviction. Doesn't even make them think maybe. I don't find that to be intellectually honest. Now, if somebody can come on here and explain what their reasoning is, that's what I'm trying to do, is open the opportunity, because it doesn't make sense to me. I'm certain Jody's guilty argument does not make any sense to me. I'm not arguing with anybody who thinks maybe, but that certainty is I don't think anybody could possibly look at this case objectively and be certain about Jody's guilt.
Truthfully, I would love for someone to come, because I would like to hear why people believe that.
Me too.
I would love to hear why.
Me too. More than taking the time and typing out a Facebook post, but actually having a back and forth conversation about it.
There was one more question from Caroline in the chat. It was regarding the robbery and if Jody was ever charged for the robbery.
Yeah, Jody was arrested for the robbery. Jody wasn't charged with the murder till after Sonia Lucas's dying declaration statement. Jody was arrested the day after the murder for the robbery. they were awaiting trial for the robbery that whole time for 6 months. And then when Sonia Lucas said that Mario said Jojo, that's when they arrested Jody. That's when they charged Jody with the murder. Prior to that, it was only for the robbery. And then they dropped the robbery charges and tried him for murder.
All right, this next statement comes from Nancy. She says, I keep thinking that Jody could have been identified by the feminine shoe found at the robbery. Is it possible that the police knew the shoe would tie Jody to the robbery, but didn't want to put it in their report, and that's why Sturgill claims to identify Jody instead?
No, I don't think so. I think Sturgill's just lying. I think that I think that McGinnis had a hunch based on, there was word on the street that Jody was responsible for this robbery. At the crime scene, Andre Williams was telling the police and telling Sherelle Moore and telling them that they all thought Jody did this. So I think based on that, and they know Jody is related to Leon Newcombs, that I think McGinnis had a hunch Jody was responsible for the robbery. A hunch that turned out to be correct. But when he didn't have any proof of it, I think he just got Sturgill to come in there and lie. And I keep, and that's one thing that I will dig my heels in and stand my ground on. That man walked in that court and perjured himself.
Oof.
You don't, when you document, when you completely change your, and I went, and again, that's one of the things that I went through in this closing. But I mean, think about it practically. On the night when it happened, when he wrote the report, he pulls up behind the car. He says the only thing he sees is the two guys fighting over the gun, that he got up and joins in the fight. And while he was doing that, he noticed somebody slip out of the car the other side and run away. To then go before the jury and say he drove from a complete other direction. He was parked right in front. The headlights were on the car. When he got out of the car, he was face to face with that person. And that's what he's focused on, not the two guys fighting over the gun. Like I'll use the term again, since I guess it makes people mad. That's not an intellectually honest argument to claim that he's not lying. He 100% is lying. He's absolutely. So is Jody, to be fair. But Sturgill, the officer, stood up there and lied. They lied to make this, to cut corners, to cheat, to make this conviction happen.
Mm-hmm. So to go back to this question, and we're talking about Jody talked about wearing clogs, and that when they showed up at the Miles household, they were barefoot.
Yeah.
Were the shoes ever found at the crime scene, or they just run out of them at some point? Because I feel like if you're running in clogs, you're running out of them at some point. But that doesn't mean they were left at the scene.
I think either. Jody said that they ran out of them right there at the crime scene.
Okay.
Like basically when they took off to run, they were like, fuck these shoes. And they took off and went.
Okay.
And left the shoes behind. But there's nothing about those shoes that I've seen of it. But then again, Jody says like there was more. Well, we have this original murder book is not that Jody said when Jody got discovery for the robbery, there was and for the murder while they were still in prison, when their family members got it and dropped it off to them, or their attorney did, or however they got it. There was a lot more. Like Jody said, there was a report on an interview with Sonia from that night. Doesn't exist in the file now. There was a report with Sonia's stepdad from that night. Not in the report. Not in there now. There was more reports because I believe Jody said that there's something about the shoe in the original robbery report, but it's not in there now.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of that stuff. So I don't know.
Well, and we also know from the crime scene diagram that you had drawn that there should be a report with that, just by speaking with the guy that drew it.
Right.
So I mean, there is lots of stuff missing.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I put up the rest of what I had. One of the things that I was doing this week was I was able to FOIA and get a hold of the autopsy report, because that was not in the prosecutor's file or in the murder book. So I put that up. I also, I know we got a question about FOIA, so I'll wait about that. We'll get to that in just a second. Just go ahead and go on with the question.
Okay, so we did have a question in the chat. It was asked about how long the jury deliberated for.
It's 5 hours.
5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Allison has two questions. How did Rabia get the case, and did she know much about it before passing it on to Bob?
So Rabia got the case from an advocate named Jacqueline Williams. And I don't know much I don't know a lot about Jacqueline. I know she does a lot of advocate work. She's actually worked with, I can't remember the name. The person who, gosh darn, I can't remember his name. Richard Perry, that we talked about in episode 1, the kid that he was with that murdered the other boy, she's worked with him with kind of some prison conditions in the juvenile center, so she had some connections to the area. She's worked on Jody's case for a long time, and so Jacqueline is the one that reached out to Rabia and sent it to Rabia. So the case went from like here in Michigan out to Baltimore to Rabia. Rabia worked on it for almost a year, so she knew quite a bit about it, but she had limit. She was working with just what she had available to her. She'd seen enough to, and that's the thing is, as I try to like point out in these closing arguments, like this is a complicated case. It's not hard to figure out if Jody Hill is guilty or innocent. Like when she read through, and it's like, oh, what is the linchpin of the state's case? This person who says they didn't see anything for 6 months, then says this whole story about JoJo did it. Like that's their case. And then she also knew about the DNA on the bullet casing. So she'd seen enough of it to know that this is very obviously a case of wrongful conviction. Robbie had even sent a private investigator here to do a couple interviews and start to work on the case, but she just hadn't had the bandwidth to really dig into it the way we've dug into it. And that's why Robbie then sent it to me.
Well, I'm happy we have it. So Allison's second question is, I'm so confused about the changing the time of the robbery. Wouldn't the police and the DA be worried about the defense getting hold of the dispatch log, the EMS report, or witness interviews about the timing? And then Tony adds, could White have demanded the dispatch log from the state? And also this says the timing of the robbery. I think they're talking about the murder.
Yeah. So, that was probably my typo because I had to do Janet's job this week.
Gotcha.
And I'm not good at it. So the change of the time of the murder is, I mean, this is the most, it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in a case. Maybe, I mean, one of the weirdest things. It's also pretty damn obvious to me. And so the first thing was like, wasn't there a risk of them finding out what happened as far as the time? Yeah, they could have, White could have demanded the dispatch log. White could have demanded to see the EMS report. Like there are several places where that time was time stamped. But I think what they were counting on and what they got was a public defender that didn't have the time to fully investigate. And you also have to keep in mind the timing of the murder was never in question. Like no one ever, like imagine, even for some of you that even with all the evidence presented over this podcast series, who are still like, that doesn't, like, that's crazy. They wouldn't, like, so imagine being an attorney working with the cop, like in real life at the time this was happening. The last thing that you're thinking is, well, they changed the time. And also, maybe this speaks to my bias, but Jody didn't know what time the murder happened. So Jody didn't know if it happened at 12:40 or 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. Jody, remember, they originally thought that it happened like at 3 a.m. That's why when they said, where were you at? Jody said, I was home sleeping, because Jody found out about it at 2 or 3 in the morning when Sherelle got back and thought that it had just happened. So I think yes, there was a risk there by the prosecution that would happen, but at the same time, it was a pretty minimal risk. I don't think they had any indication. My guess is they probably worked on a bunch of cases with White. And I think they probably had a pretty good idea that White wasn't going to dig so deeply into it that he started questioning things like the timing of the murder. And then even if he did, worst case scenario, they just dropped the charges before court. And also, and they still had a little bit to work with, right? Because they didn't have the timesheet. So they had, the three witnesses, Princella, who was very, very adamant that she was there at 11, and she remembers that because she pointed at the clock and said, why are all these lights on? Look, it's 11 o'clock and you still have all these lights on. What's going on? And hung around for a little bit and they were still working. And then you had the two other witnesses that said they didn't leave until around midnight. They could have maybe tried to punt that as like, it's been a year since they were in, since it happened, and maybe their memories aren't great. And that could be why. Maybe it was actually 11:30 when Jody left, or, but my guess is if that happened, they would have just been like, oh, you know what? We made a mistake. I truly believe that if White had said, I want to see the dispatch log, And the dispatch log, so let's say the dispatch log said the murder happened at 11:49 was the 911 call.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a legitimate chance that Cotter's like, okay, well, whoops, I'm glad you found that for us. I guess we'll probably have to drop the charges.
Oof, that's tough.
But the way they played it was, as we see, because we have the prosecutor's file, the prosecutor turned everything over in discovery. To everything they turned over to the defense, short of possibly the timesheet, because that's in the prosecutor's file. And according to a letter written by Ernie White, he never got the timesheet, even though it's in their file.
Mm-hmm.
So he should have gotten that. But what they did is, in the prosecutor's file, there is no EMS report. In the prosecutor's file, there is no dispatch log. So they were able to say, well, we didn't have it. We didn't think we needed it. We didn't have it. So they didn't have it and not give it to them. They just never got it. Now, that being said, that doesn't make it not Brady. So like the state, the government had access to documentation that showed when this murder happened. And they didn't turn it over. The fact that the prosecutor didn't know it happened, so like the police withheld it from the prosecutor, doesn't make it not Brady. They're still responsible for it, whether they knew it existed or because it existed. It's exculpatory. That would be exculpatory evidence that wasn't turned over to the defense. Just because the police didn't give it to the prosecutor doesn't make it not Brady.
So there's a question in the chat from Mo that says, have I missed any updates regarding when the AG investigation started? McGinnis's reply alluded to starting after the initial FOIA request, but there was a letter from 2023.
Yeah, so it was the Attorney General's office had it for, I think, a couple years. From my understanding is that they weren't really doing anything with it. It was just sitting there. And McGinnis, giving him the benefit of the doubt, I'm guessing didn't know that was happening. Because I do know that McGinnis did contact an investigator that works for the AG's CIU and tell them that they should check into this case. But they already had it. But then, from my understanding, when the podcast started, the AG's office was getting flooded with a lot of information about this case, and that's why they moved it into an active, open, and like they're currently working on it right now.
Thank you, listeners.
Mm-hmm.
So our last question comes from Ari. It says, are there any avenues left for Bob to get the dispatch log?
Well, I don't know. So let me tell you where we're at now. First of all, I started talking about FOIA earlier. So the Berrien County Task Force was involved in this case. I was told by a state police. I already talked to you guys a little bit about this. I think one of the troopers that worked the case that said they maintain copies of the entire case file. So I FOIA'd that. They said they don't have any responsive files other than this document that had a bunch of lab results on it. And so that has been, so if you look on the case files on the website, there's, I think it says like MSP FOIA, that, or might say lab results. That's what I got from the state police. I also did the same thing with the city of Niles. Their police department was part of the task force. They said they don't have anything on it. Now this is an active investigation, so they don't have to give me anything about this case. I last week filed a FOIA request for the Benton Harbor PD, just said I want the dispatch log for November 15th and 16th for that day. Because I've got other stuff going on with this, but now I want to see, what are they going to produce? What are they going to say? What kind of shenanigans are they going to try to pull? Because I already know what I know.
Mm-hmm.
And the response I got from that, they sent me back an incident log, which I'll get published too. So it's an incident report list. And on that, it has the times, the report time, and it shows the 15th and the 16th, and it shows at 12:40 a.m. homicide. And that's what they gave me. And they said the dispatch logs no longer exist. I have reason to believe that's not accurate. They're not required actually to retain them that long, but from my understanding, it's a computer program, and they're still using the same system, so it should still be in the computer, in that same, in the same type of system that has the report numbers in them. because they're not required to maintain that stuff for all this time either. So we'll see. So I responded, when I first saw it, I just saw this list, 1240 homicide. I'm like, oh, well, there it is. I guess I was wrong about that. And then I looked at it. I was like, wait a minute, that says report. That's just the time they wrote on the report as to when it happened. That's not a time-stamped log.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it wasn't dispatched as a homicide. So that, again, it's not a timestamp log. And then later I read it, and it literally says that's the time on the report is what they put on the report.
Okay.
Because it was dispatch. Remember, the first dispatch was to a shots fired call.
Yes.
The second one came down. And here's another thing I didn't touch on that occurred to me in going through this process. The second call came from Victoria Miles, right?
Mm-hmm.
That call, according to the records, came in as shots fired and a man down. Victoria Miles said at trial that she never opened the door before she called 911. How does she know there's a man down?
That is a good question.
Do with that what do we want? But she claimed she heard the shots and immediately grabbed the phone and started calling 911. Now, we already know that doesn't track with what Takamoto said, which is that they heard the shots. They drove around, checked 2 whole blocks, then got a call for shots fired, continued to search, then got another call that said the man down at the house, and it got the address. So we already know that there was a delay there. It didn't happen right away. But Victoria Miles' story was, as soon as the shots stopped, she grabbed her cell phone, looked out the window, and saw this person running away. But if that's the case, how does she know there's a man down?
Mm-hmm.
If she didn't see it, or who was down?
Yeah.
So,
well, and Susan asked the peephole in the door, but I feel like there's a corner there. Like the stairs go down and around a corner.
Yeah,
he's laying at the bottom of the stairs. So
yeah, they turned, and she never said she looked out the peephole. I believe White, even on cross-examination, asked her, "Did you ever see the body?" And she said no. So,
all right. So what do we have coming up this weekend, Bob?
All right. So moving forward right now, because I'm kind of paused and kind of back about this as far as the question about the FOIA, just so you know, I just filed another FOIA request that I'm hoping will produce something from Benton Harbor PD. I don't want to really talk about that too much until I get the results of it back. But that's something we're still working on. In the meantime, like I said, there's people I want to interview. I haven't been able to. I'm just not interviewing them right now. In my conversation with the Attorney General, essentially they've just said, they can't tell me what to do. I can go do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. But my promise to them was, my number one goal is make sure justice is served and not make a podcast. So if I could mess something up for you by going to talk to someone, then I'm not going to do that. So we're kind of waiting on that. Again, I want to talk to Jody. So there will be more to this story, and there will be a conclusion coming to the season. This closing argument was not the conclusion. In the meantime, we're going to do what we've kind of done in seasons past. We're in between. We're going to kind of take things that are happening right now and try to bring people in and do interviews, and we're going to kind of do some hodgepodge episodes between now and then, while we're waiting to see how things shake out here. I truthfully think that we're going to see some resolution in this case a lot sooner than people think. And that's just my gut instinct, is that you're going to see something happen in here pretty damn quick. So in the meantime, like I said, we're going to be doing other things. As far as the episodes go, just so you know, I'm going to keep everything in season 15. I'm not, because it just messes up how things load up into people's podcast players and stuff. So there'll be, this weekend's episode will be season 15, episode 22, even though it's not related to Jody's case. So what we have going on this weekend is a case that is near and dear to me, Zach, and Janet's heart, has been for a really long time, has been really in the news lately, is the Delphi case. So I asked, for those of you that are on Patreon and listen to the pregame episodes, we've talked a lot about Delphi over the last few weeks. And I've had some questions, some feelings about it. I had some very specific questions. So I asked Bob Mata to come on the show. And this weekend, Bob and I sat down for, I think, an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, that's great. And
had a real long conversation about the Delphi case. And I think it is, from what I've heard, it's probably the most concise, best episode that I've heard of anything. And it's mostly Bob talking, not me. about the Delphi case. We talked about some very specific things, and I'll say this for those of you that listen on Patreon, you know that based on what I've heard, I've had, a lot of people are very convinced that Richard Allen is innocent. I was leaning more towards he's probably guilty, but also it was a shitty investigation and definitely not a fair trial. After this conversation, I'll say that Bob convinced me. I would think, based on what he's told me, I'm pretty firmly in the Richard Allen is probably innocent camp right now. I still want to see all the trial transcripts and stuff for myself, but it's a really good conversation. I think y'all are really going to enjoy it. So make sure you tune into that this Sunday. Again, it's a long one. It's an hour and 20 minutes. I think it flows along pretty well, and it's a really good conversation. So there's something for you to do after your Black Friday shopping. I believe, hopefully anybody listening to this, do people still get up at 5 a.m. and go shopping anymore?
I don't know that you even have to anymore.
Yeah, everything's online now.
Yeah.
But I hope y'all had, for those of you that celebrate, I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving yesterday, and hope you're having a great, hopefully extended weekend if your job allows you to have that. And we'll talk to you guys again next week.
Bye, guys. What did she say? Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, damn it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, Danielle and Susan, thank you guys for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Caroline, so Caroline says that she's not ready to talk Delphi. It's too soon. What a disaster. I think you'll be. You should listen, Caroline. It was. I was really happy with it. I didn't know. Bob and I are both yappers, so I didn't know how concise it would be, but it really drives into some points in some specific details that I hadn't really heard before. That you're going to hear on Sunday. So I think it's definitely worth it. Thanks, Grayson, so much. Happy Thanksgiving to you, buddy. Thank you guys. And
Ba-ding, ba-ding.
That being said, it's 9 o'clock our time here in good old Michigan.
I'm tired.
Zach's tired. I'm tired. I don't have to wake up early in the morning, though. I just realized that.
That is nice.
Do you have to wake up early in the morning?
Sweet. I give you my sister's at noon.
What is this? Hang on. Lynn says Gray Hughes host or has the timeline animation to Tim Allen as bridge guy. He had a fair. There's some typos in there, Lynn, so I'm trying to decipher what you're saying. Gray Hughes has the timeline animation.
I really don't like Gray Hughes.
Who is Gray Hughes?
He's another content creation
podcast or YouTube or
YouTuber. He's a.
Well, I'll check it out because I want to get as much as I can from both sides of it to understand it.
I've tried to watch a lot of his stuff early on, like before Richard Allen was arrested, like early on. He was one of the kind of the first people that were really on creating content about it, and I wasn't stoked about the stuff he was saying. And there's a lot of listeners that are kind of saying,
is he the one that released the crime scene photos?
I don't think he was,
because there was somebody. It wasn't the murder. I know the murder sheet was kind of mixed up and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody else released those photos.
Maybe it was him.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Again, I probably should have heard him, but I've never heard of him. Lynn says she doesn't like it, but he has the facts. Hope so. Well, Lynn, let us know, because we're obviously next. Oh, by the way, I should have said this in the follow-up. Next week for the follow-up, when we record on the 3rd, Bob's going to join us.
Heck yes.
Because there was we were already an hour and 20 minutes into it, and the chat was going crazy, asking a bunch of questions for Bob. And so I said, you know what, we're going to end this, and we'll ask those questions in the follow-up, and Bob is going to join us for it. So that'll be happening Tuesday. But yeah, Lynn, you should listen if you feel like, because I don't know what facts Gray might have that can kind of overcome some of the stuff that I got out of Bob. And again, I went into this believing that Allen was probably guilty, or excuse me, probably guilty. And once I really like probed into some of my questions, I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck is going on here? So anyway, I think it'll be a good listen for you. Even if you think that he's got the facts, then listen, see what we have to say, see how you feel about it. Everybody should have an open mind. I certainly do. Gray Hughes had the van info for his release. All right, with that, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this thing up. We're gonna go join our families for this wonderful holiday break. If I can get my mouse all the way up to the end stream button. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for the super chats. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
See ya.